Hi friends, host Eric here, host Talking with Famous People, and in this video I'm going to talk about the problem that atheists have and why they are hitching their boat to the wrongness tug. The thing is, it's not that being non-religious or anti-deist is inherently a bad thing. I mean, certainly if you're determined to argue against justifications that don't sustain logical scrutiny, well, religious justifications for acceptability of things never do. So if I were to say, it's okay that I killed those innocent people because I did it for Allah or Christ or whomever, that's never going to be okay, because that's not an objective justification. The text of the religious document may be objectively accessible. In other words, it's external data, presumably, that's being referenced. But the actual prescriptive qualities of religion, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, the normative qualities, I guess I should say, but they're prescriptive in the sense that it's telling you what to do. Those qualities are it's like a law, but it's secondary to a criminal law. So as a consequence, it's simply because the prohibitive aspects of religion, where it goes like, you can't do this, to the extent that they're negative prescriptions, and they're correct, then they correlate exactly with the negative rights framework. To the extent that they're negative prescriptions and they don't correlate with the negative rights framework, then they're non-universal. So what is it that atheists get wrong? Well, first of all, there's an assumption amongst atheists that there's something damaging being done by religious people. That because wrongness justifies itself with religion some of the times, that religion or faith or God is the problem. And particularly what they note is that when arguing at least about God, the believers typically don't make very good arguments and don't feel, apparently, to the atheist observer, as though there's any reason or need to be sound in one's reasoning or logic when it comes to God, as though, although giving reasons as to why one believes in God, one doesn't think those reasons are subject to scrutiny. So, okay, I get how that's frustrating about some kinds of religious people. But the question really ought to be, what is the manner in which the religious language is being used? If I don't use any religious language, you don't know whether I believe in God or not, whether I practice any faith-based behaviors or not. And there's no reason for us to have any kind of argument at all. It's only when religious people use religious language that there comes to be clash. But it's only appropriate to clash with religious language if that language is used inappropriately. So it's never appropriate to use religion or faith or God or anything like that as a justification for public policy or as an excuse for a behavior that's transgressive. No transgressive behavior is made non-transgressive by appeals to religion. That's a failed substantiation because it's the religion is either in agreement with the definition of transgression derived from negative rights, or it's wrong. And if you're being accused of violating somebody's negative rights, and then there's just no excuse for it. So, okay, atheists hearing all this will probably think, well, Eric, I mean, you sound pretty atheistic in this video, except I'm not an atheist. And I understand that the reason atheists get so attached to this dismissive reduction of faith has little to do with how faith actually manifests, because you could point out correlations between any line of thinking, ideology, and some sort of bad outcomes. That's not a way to justify anything. Instead, you've got to look at faith as decoupled from affirming statements of God's existence. There's no reason why one has to affirm statements of God's existence in order to engage in faith-based behaviors. And in fact, it's obviously a level above to have a metaframe that allows one to incorporate faith-based behaviors while not requiring one to affirm statements, because one understands that faith is a behavior, whereas affirmation of statements is locutionary business with illocutionary purposes. I came to be actively engaged with God, for lack of a better word, by Alcoholics Anonymous. And it was a big challenge for me because I went into Alcoholics Anonymous as an atheist. I was a rather strident opponent of God, religion, and those sort of things. Although decreasingly so as I got older, because it was just shooting fish in a barrel, you know? I mean, it's like, there's no reason to even bother having those arguments. I know what all the arguments are, and when I'm arguing the atheistic side, I rely always on, I don't know, I'll mix it up, but I'll generally start with, okay, well, let's have some definitions, and then, you know, the deist normally gets hamstrung right there. You don't even really have to go any further, because they don't know how to argue the deist side in general, and don't care. For them, their faith-based behavior isn't contingent on logical validation. Mine isn't either. What it's contingent on is awareness of a larger metaphor. So there's people, rationalists, atheists, and those two groups tend to correlate pretty well. They use the words magical thinking in a most pejorative fashion. And it's designed to reduce all expressions of faith from a deist perspective to the same as my lucky rabbit's foot, just superstition. And, atheists would be able to make a pretty good case that there's no meaningful distinction between the two, provided they know what they're doing. The problem with that, of course, is, well, prayer is the only example of magical thinking that I know of that seems to be slab moving. And you could argue that, well, this is self-fulfilling or whatever, and that's fine. I'm not disputing that, but it's irrelevant. It's magical thinking, after all. So your explanation is always going to be disabused of you by me, because I'm going to always say, well, no, it's magic. it's not the thing you say. Well, why would I say such a thing? How can I substantiate that myself? Well, the point is, if it's not magic, then I've not accessed magical thinking, which is the whole point of faith in the first place. And while rationalists are engaged in their own kind of slab management there and magical thinking, they're trying to prioritize the map over the territory. So while the progressives have a problem of failing to distinguish between field and objects, they don't understand the way a system is impacted by behavior of the agents and objects in the system. They don't understand the fact that it's an open system in which the behavior of the agents and objects within on that field can change the rules of the field by virtue of their behavior. And that makes it an open system and means that our heuristics are of little value and our predictions are no better than guessing, basically. So when, you predict that, well, if we give more money to poor people, they're going to get richer, obviously. It might seem that way to you, but of course it doesn't work that way. If the government gives means-tested money to poor people, they get poorer and they're trapped in poverty. So that's one of those realities. You've got to be able to distinguish between the map and the territory for faith, even more so than you do for progressivism. With progressivism, you have to understand that some systems are closed and some systems are open. You have to understand the value of preserving the integrity of the system even when you don't like the instance of results, or when you think it provides an unjust result in this instance. One recalls that it's just if and when it's applied appropriately and fairly in all circumstances, regardless if we like this particular outcome or not, it's still justice, provided it is responsive to transgressive and not responsive to non-transgressive actions. You can't have a government that's punishing things that aren't crimes, and you can't have a government that's not punishing things that are crimes if you want to have a free and civil society. And the government is going to have to ultimately make a distinction between that which is an actual crime and that which is just a prohibition based on the authoritarian preferences of this or that statist. God's different a little bit than all that. It's not so much field, object, agent. It's, as indicated, a matter of map and territory. So when we talk about something existing, the meaning of the word exists, the only real meaning of the word exists, is observed and noted for others. So obviously, what is wrong with this fucker? I gotta lay onto this fucker. He needs some serious horn action up his ass. Fucktard. Why are you going so... Now you're speeding up. Why? Okay, so... Whatever the map territory is... First of all, this is how you beat atheists in a debate. And it's not difficult because they don't have good arguments, really, usually. Occasionally you'll get one who knows what they're doing in bed, but by and large, no. First, why are you affirming? Make them affirm. Okay, well, you're saying that you're negating because you're saying there is no God, but I'm negating your denial. And that's how it ought to be, because the status quo consensus amongst most people of most cultures in the world embraces some form of God. Now, if that doesn't fly, if you can't get them to affirm, fine, no big deal. You can always negate. But, if you can't get them to affirm, you can always affirm. So if you're asked to, the reason this is important is because if you're affirming a claim, then you have a burden of proof. If you're negating a claim, then they have a burden of proof, and you have a negationary, a almost infinite number of pathways to negate. You can negate in countless different ways, not almost infinite, but a lot of different ways. You can, negate by a truth testing paradigm where you say the statement simply is factually untrue or counter to evidence, to facts and evidence. You could turn it and say this part of it is true, but it actually does the opposite thing, or it does what you say, but that's the opposite, good or bad. You could negate by simply saying it's a tie, and to affirm you have to do better than a tie. You can negate by saying your justifications weren't topical. You can negate by saying your justifications were discursively flawed in some way that means we ought to negate regardless of the argumentation. There's lots of different ways you can negate, but to affirm is to affirm. And while you may have different strategies to affirm, like I'm going to use these affirmational arguments, those are just framework differences. They aren't meta-framework differences like they are with negation. So if I choose to do a discourse critique, it's a different manner of debate than if I choose to negate on impacts. No, here's a bunch of negative disadvantages of your thing. That's one way to negate. You just don't pile up, you just don't win the impact calculus because my disads are more significant than your ads. But you could also, try to win under your own framework and negate their framework. We shouldn't measure impacts at all. You should vote for me because the principles of the matter and the deontological considerations ought to be prioritized in the judgment of the round. So, when you're arguing with an atheist, then the first thing I would do is ask them to define existence. And they're not going to have a definition of exist or existence, except to provide some vague synonyms like be or something like that. I mean, the only meaningful definition of it, as a consequence, is that which has been observed and noted as observed, such that it can be objectively determined that the thing noted is quote-unquote existential. That is an objective data point that has been referenced and presumably can be referenced again. So, when I mean it's objective data point, I mean simply that what color that plant is over there is objective because more than I can look at it. It's accessible to anybody who comes over here to look at it, and they can draw their own conclusions on the data without having to go through another person. So let's say your atheist knows the definition of existence that I provided and goes for it. Well, that's not going to do him any good. It's going to cause him a lot of problems because I can point out that God's been observed. I've observed him. And I've noted that observation for others. So by that definition, he exists. Well, then I don't like that definition of exists anymore. Okay, well, what do you mean? I mean, it's a physically concrete object. So you're saying that because I can't establish that God is a distinct single object in space, like say a rock or a tree, a specific one, that therefore he doesn't exist? But I thought we were using the observation definition. Well, but you can't, then just anything you observe is existent. Well, that's true. So, unicorns are existent because I can reference them. I can draw a picture, render it objective, and you can agree or disagree that it's a unicorn. If we were to see an animal that looked just like a unicorn, we'd identify it as a unicorn. So, obviously, unicorns exist. Now, the fact that nobody has a physical unicorn is irrelevant. Mary Had a Little Lamb exists, even though nobody physically has it. I mean, who buys, nobody even digitally has it. Who buys Mary Has a Little Lamb off iTunes? Nobody. But everybody knows the song. Nobody has it, and everybody knows it. So, does it not exist. It's been observed. It's been noted for others. Well, then what doesn't exist, Eric? Nothing we can think of. We can think of it and observe its existence, even in our own head, then it's existent. It has a symbol for it. The symbol represents the existential quality, or conveys to us the existential quality of that which it represents. It's impossible to symbolize the non-existent. So, obviously, we're symbolizing God. We got a word for him. Doesn't that make him existent? Now, your atheists will be tied in fits by this. They won't have any idea what to fucking do with it. Why not? Because there's no meaningful distinction to be made between that which is observed physically and that which is observed deductively, or that which is observed through faith, or that which is observed through Observations are observations. And the atheist typically will think of himself as an objectivist, that we can know the truth by empirics and objective data. Of course, that's not true at all. So, I mean, there's the other big problem. They think because they mistake the map for the territory, they assume that if there's a mountain on the map, then you can say there's a mountain there, and if there's a river on the map, you can say there's a river there. But they're not applying the same logic to the other side. So, yeah, I get that the map shows a river, and thus you are justified adequately in declaring that thing a river. You are correct according to the map. However, there's not a river here. This thing in front of us is a forest, and there's no river. So, pointing to those trees and calling them a river and insisting that it is because here's the symbol and that's what it shows you, it doesn't, you're missing the point. That's not what it's for. It's not, the map doesn't exist so that you can berate reality for failing to match it. It exists so you can understand reality without having to experience everything. Now, the kind of deists that atheists want to argue with are people who confuse their faith behavior with their advocacies. Because, obviously, if somebody's going to come up and say, well, the Jews are a people because God had sex with Eve. I mean, Satan had sex with Eve and thereby made the Jews. Okay. I mean, if you want to argue with people like that, then you want to play t-ball, even though you're a steroid-riddled 30-year-old man. You don't belong in t-ball anymore. There's no hay to be made arguing against crazy people. Look, I mean, the claim Eve had sex with Satan and made Jews is completely unfalsifiable. And even if you were to accept the text as literally true, it's not in the text. And it's just nutty, But the problem there isn't, for those kind of deists, the problem is a mistaking of, it's simply not distinguishing between behaviors and conclusions. So, atheists, to think that matters related to God and faith are matters to be adjudicated by the rules of conclusion drawing guarantees you're going to be wrong every time, because that's not what it is. If the deists also think that it's going to be a matter of conclusion drawing and the legitimacy or validity or soundness of those conclusions, they are also wrong. It's a behavior. One I'd highly advocate. If you want to impress me and you're an atheist, commit to a regimen of prayer for a few weeks. The thing about it is, that's real humility. you know, I did it. I did the prayer thing because I was desperate. I didn't go to pray because I believed. I told myself, just do what other people say and listen to them and obey them, because that's something you never try, Eric. And I did. And there was some such time when I was rather attached to faith. It was new and interesting to me. Playing around with magical thinking, recognizing that it has an inherent quality of begging the question. Anytime your possible God meaning turns out not to pan out the way you thought, you just go, well, God works in mysterious ways. Guess he meant something else. I'm just gonna not file that in the, this is why you don't believe this shit, Eric. Just remember, it's magical thinking. It doesn't have to make sense. If it did make sense, it wouldn't be magical, and then it wouldn't have the value, utility, and critical importance that it does for individual human beings. Be humble enough to go through the motions of prayer for a persistent period of time as an exercise in framework broadening. So just to end this video on atheism, number 1, atheism is boring. Number 2, atheists are boring. Number 3, those arguments are so fucking dumb and stale and tired. Number 4, if you want to make atheism fun again, come debate me. I'll debate the deist side and I'll whip your ass. I'll use some arguments I didn't use right now even. I walked you through the arguments. Let's try something new. I'll figure something out. Whatever. It doesn't matter. Of course I'll whip your ass. Your position is just as illogical as theirs. It's not the sort of thing one should do advocacies on. So thanks for watching, and don't forget to eat plenty of cheese.